I always want to go back to this because this is really important, and I think it'll be good for Gabe, and we'll introduce Gabe here in a minute. I'll just go through a couple of administrative, administrative things just for the day, and then we'll introduce Mike. So I'm super excited that he came on and is going to teach us some really awesome skills. But the vision really for us, Mike, and I've talked about this, is to create a community whose highest delight, I think this is really important, highest delight is to pour out to one another and to the community around us. And so that's the vision, because, it's important to understand, like, what are we doing here? Is this just a lead thing? No, but we're trying to develop leaders and who want to continue to grow, not for the intention of being the centerpiece, but the intention of being someone who pours out. Some people would use the verbiage of a, servant leader, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is, how do we grow our skill set, grow our particular design for the intention and purpose of being better at serving and influencing and having impact for the betterment of mankind. So, that's just always important to understand. That's the vision for us. The mission, which I always call is, how do we get there, is, the acronym is GIVE. So GIVE. I'm big into acronyms. John Waters knows that. It drives me bananas. But it's generosity by developing your unique design. Okay, so that's one of the elements and pillars to becoming a really good leader, is understanding how you're hardwired. So that's really important to understand. The I is impact by influence and leadership development. So what we're trying to do is to continue to, like we're going to do today, it's just one of the other strands of growth, which is to have impact by influence and leadership development. So it's continuing to grow those skill sets so that you can be more effective and better at being a leader. And then value people's dignity by exercising compassion to the needy. So, it's hard to be effective at leading when you don't have we'll call them goggles of seeing people with eyes of compassion, seeing them as people that are just, have dignity. And that's a battlefield that everybody has every day, is trying to remember that people just have intrinsic value, no matter what life they come from, no matter what position they have. And so we're trying to continue to hone that so that we're seeing people as having dignity and exercising compassion towards them. And then the final one, which is the E, is to educate the next by intentional mentoring and duplication. So we're continuing to press this button of, how do we pass the baton? How do we pour into the next? How are we giving downward to the next person in line? So we're just sort of pouring those out. So those are the 4 strands that we're trying to hone in on that gets us to that place of the vision ultimately, so that we can have success. So I just always want to reiterate that, because it's important to understand, like, why are we here? What are we doing? Where are we headed? How are we going to get there? And so it's just, it's important that we have clarity on that as well. So, so I'm just going to take a minute to introduce Gabe. Gabe was brought to us through Kevin, who is being a slacker this morning. I'm not sure where he is, so we're going to give him a hard time. But Gabe is a really neat guy. I had the privilege of interviewing him a couple weeks ago. He's been with farmers for about 18 years. Has had a hugely successful career over there, has a big team. He's probably one of the top producers in town, and wants to continue to grow, this is exactly who we're kind of looking for, is a leader who wants to continue to say, I want to grow more, I want to have more impact, I want to be successful. And he's already had a tremendous amount of success. He loves to backpack, so him and I are definitely going to get along. Mountain biking, disc golf, and he does like triathlons and Ironman. So the guy is a stud. You know, when he talks about serving for him, he says it really matters because the more you give, the more you get in return. So it's really important for him. He's got some stuff he'll talk about later, you know, as you guys get to know him with his son, things that they've gone through and really had to serve that had a real impact on me when I was just interviewing them. And just so, you know, I'm just super excited to have him a part of H3, and I know that he's going to be a great contributor and a great part of the culture here. So thanks for joining, Gabe.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm excited about it. I really am. I mean, it couldn't have came in a better time. It was exactly what I was looking for that day when I was talking to you.
Yeah, that's terrific. That's exactly what we're looking for, is just always trying to, you know, as we kind of keep our eyes peeled, we're always looking for those people that fall within that category of H3, which is high integrity, high connecting, and high giving. So, you know, we're always looking for those kind of people who, again, are leaders. They want to grow. They want to continue to expand. They're either in a leadership position or striving to get there or wanting to grow further. So anyway, so thanks for joining us. Kurt just popped on too, and I'm sure we'll get a couple of stragglers. So just so you guys understand, and then we're going to dive into Mike. So we've got a website now, at least the domain, which is h3arizona.com. For some reason, someone had H3, which was like a hamburger shop. I'm not in like Argentina, so I'm not sure what that is. So I got H3 Arizona. It was either H3 Arizona or H3 Phoenix. Kevin's wife is developing a couple of logos for us. I'm going to present those to you guys over the next week or two and just get sort of a consensus. We'll pick one, and then we're going to build the website. What I need everybody to do is to get me a headshot in the next week and a bio, okay? Because that's one of the things we're going to put on the website. So I need you guys to get me a headshot and a bio call it by next Friday at the latest. And so if you can do that, that'd be great. And then we're going to put together the website. And so we're going to start to have something a little bit more substantive. So when you're talking to somebody, you'll actually say, go to the website. It'll explain everything. We're going to work on putting a video together as well. I'm talking with Ryan that's going to put a video together for us as well. So that's all the admin stuff for now. One final thing, everybody open your calendars and just, you know, the 17th, I believe, yeah. So the 17th, we will meet again. So make sure you throw that on your calendar. So September 17th, we will definitely meet. Okay. Well, I'm super excited for today because we have Mike Mitchell. Mike actually was referred to me through John because we wanted to talk about, you know, conflict resolution, which is perfect right now with some of the stuff we talked about last time. And Mike has a really cool background. I'm super thankful that we get to have him here as well. Paul Valentine just joined. Good morning, Paul. So Mike he's a graduate of Auburn University, and he has a degree in civil engineering. He spent about 10 years as an Air Force officer, so thank you for your service, leading project teams on military system development programs, including the F-22 Raptor, Air Superiority Fighter, and then the Titan 4, I think, or Titan 9, is that what it is?
Titan 4, yeah.
Oh, Titan 4, yeah, you're right. Heavy space launch vehicle. And then after leaving the Air Force, he spent 9 years in progressive operations management positions with, is it Genus or Genus?
Genus, G-E-N-U-S, yeah.
Genus and Tokyo Electron Limited, companies who develop, manufacture, and support capital equipment used in fabrication of computer chips. Smart guy. Mike has also done strategic planning, people development, or working for a large church, and then over 20 years of proven leadership results with project manager, line manager, an executive, and now shares his talents with clients of all size. And so he's really quite a guy and has done a tremendous amount. And so we're super thankful that he volunteered his time and is going to spend some time with us today talking about, that wonderful thing that we always enjoy doing, which is having conflict. But it seems like we can't get away from it, as we all know. Ariel knows that as well. So Mike, I will leave the floor to you, and thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for having me today. And so let me start out with, okay, as a military officer, the thing that I learned almost immediately is that my technical skills were irrelevant if I couldn't lead people. And the Air Force drilled that into me very, very early. So I've been a student of leadership basically my entire career. And so when it comes right down to it, leadership development is really the heart of my passion and the heart of my practice. And I think that this topic of conflict is very, very relevant to the mission that you're talking about, right? To the purpose that you're trying to fulfill. Because the reality is, quite honestly, our world does conflict very, very poorly, right? We just fundamentally suck at it. And I'll raise my hand to say, and I do too. Okay, I have had to work at this and work at this and work at this, because I've got some biases, and I'll talk a little bit about those here in a minute, that sort of feed into that. So I want to start just with the idea that says, when we say conflict, right? When you hear that word, what's your automatic reaction? Negative? Who has a negative reaction to the word conflict? You hear it and you just automatically assume something negative. Okay, good, right? And sometimes, right, we may even have, some people even have not only a negative reaction to it, but actually a physical reaction to it, right? You hear the word and it's almost like you can feel your body tense, right? That there's just something so in depth about that grabs a hold of us. Okay, and that's one of the primary reasons that it's so difficult for us to work through and do this well, because our overall prevailing attitude about conflict is so negative. So let's talk a little bit about conflict in your home, right? When you were growing up. I grew up as the son of a military officer. Okay, my mother's family were also military officers. So when I grew up, right, Dad ruled the house, right? What Dad said went. And the idea of talking back to Dad or talking back to Mom in earshot of Dad just didn't happen, right? It just didn't happen. I learned, right, children are to be seen and not heard, okay? And I never really watched my parents fight. I know that they did, okay? I never really got a chance to watch them, engage in any real conflict, understand how to do it, right? It was, it was just largely, I learned suck it up, right? Was sort of the overall mentality that developed in my household. So how about for you? What was conflict like in your home growing up, right? Somebody talk a little bit about that. Got a volunteer that's willing to be a little vulnerable with that?
Sure.
Go ahead, Gabe.
I grew up in an Italian household.
Okay.
Dad was used as a tool to scare the hell out of the kids. Wait till your father gets home. It was a TV show, and it was also what my mom used to make sure that we behaved.
Okay.
Even though she was the one, she did a fine job on her own. She grew up in a military household.
Okay.
So I don't know why she needed my dad, but it was loud, but it was funny that you said I didn't see my parents fight. I don't know that, I don't really remember that in my childhood. I remember chaos, but also love at the end of that conflict.
Mm-hmm.
After we were told that we were wrong, we were then loved, and any apologies and things went on like that.
Great. Anybody have a household where you were really encouraged as a child to engage in dialogue with your parents with opposing points of view? Who learned from your parents how to have a debate? Anybody learn that?
I just learned not to talk back to my mom. So that was the
Right.
shoe on the back of my head once I did. So that never happened again. So
Yeah. Right. It's amazing the things, right? The biases that we bring, okay, because we don't really learn how to do this well. So if you think about it, and I ask the question, okay, raise your hand if you consider yourself to be conflict averse. You would prefer to back away from conflict. Okay. All right. Connor, welcome. My name's Mike. I see you shaking your hand. You learned somewhere along the way how to engage in conflict?
Yeah, I always had problems with that as a kid. I'm one of three, and I was the only one that would always question what my dad would say. And it wasn't back talk. It was just, really, that's what you want? or okay, like I just don't agree with that. Call it back talking. But our relationship has always been it's just different than my two older brothers have. Their relationship with him is a little different than mine.
Okay.
Because I always questioned everything he said. And so conflict for me is always, it's my opinion. I don't know. I encourage conflict myself because it's my opinion, right? And I stand up for what I think is right.
Okay.
And that's generally causes conflict. And so, I don't like to swallow my tongue, so to speak, when I probably should sometimes, which causes conflict. But
okay,
stubborn.
good.
I think it's a stubbornness.
There you go. Well, thanks for sharing that, because when it comes right down to it, right, all conflict is rooted in a difference in our values and beliefs, right? It's a difference in our values and beliefs. When we're in conflict with another individual, there's something about what we believe to be true or what we hold to be important that doesn't match what that other individual believes to be true or holds to be important. Okay, we get in conflict with our kids, right? What's important to us, that they get sleep, right? What's important to them, that they get 10 more minutes of television in, right? What's important to us is they eat something healthy. What's important to them is they eat something sweet, okay, right? We get in this place of this disconnect around our values and our beliefs. So let's talk for a couple of minutes about the idea of what we call healthy ideological conflict. So first of all, healthy and conflict in the same thing. It sort of sounds like an oxymoron, doesn't it? Given our proclivity to the idea that conflict is negative. But let's talk about healthy ideological conflict. When I say that statement, what do you think that means, right? What is healthy ideological conflict? John, I'm going to let you pop in since I haven't heard from you yet on this one.
What I think of is just having constructive, open, transparent communication, providing perspective and respecting the other individual for their perspective.
Okay.
Without an agenda.
Okay.
Which is always difficult, right?
Which is always difficult. Okay, good. Right. So the reality is every day we face situations where we have the opportunity to engage in healthy ideological dialogue. Right? Gabe, in your practice, right, you probably work with your team in trying to find best practices. How do we work this process the best way that we can to be the most effective, to be the most customer serving? And your team brings in different perspectives and different ideas for how to go about doing that, don't they?
Yes.
Right? And so you have to sit down and figure out how are we going to collaborate on coming up with ideas to come up with the best possible process.
Correct.
Right? That's healthy ideological conflict. What happens if we're as part of a team, if we don't have any healthy ideological conflict? We're working together and it's just sort of like, okay, we just sort of, you know, things just sort of get aligned and we don't engage in any sort of conflict. What happens?
Lots of creative ideas.
What's that, John?
The loss of creative ideas and solutions.
Exactly, right? It probably means that we're stuck in groupthink.
Yeah.
Right? That we've got target lock on a solution that may not be the best possible solution for what we're looking for.
Yeah.
What's the other outcome if we don't have healthy ideological conflict going on in our organization? Does that mean that conflict doesn't exist?
Mm-mm.
No.
I was just going to say it actually might lead to some resentment within the group
Okay.
if people don't feel or know how to bring up a tough question or share thoughts, and they just stay stifled.
Okay. What happens to you if you're part of a dialogue and you don't get the opportunity to share your thoughts and ideas in terms of differences of opinion about how something gets done? When a decision is made, this is the way that we're going to do it. What do?
Lack of buy-in.
Yeah.
Lack of buy-in. Okay. We have this lack of commitment
Yep.
to following through, right? And doing the things that as a team, the decision that was made, this is what we're going to do, right? Healthy ideological conflict is absolutely essential for making sure we make the best decisions and we get the maximum level of buy-in to the decisions that we're making. If we don't engage in the conflict, we don't have the buy-in. And if we don't have the buy-in, what's going to happen to our execution?
Not gonna get
It's
done.
gonna fall off. Yeah.
Okay. And by the way, Pat Lencioni in his book, The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, lays this out really, really well. If you've never read that book, it's, 20 years it's been around. It's a fundamental work. Okay. And it really talks about this whole idea of engaging in healthy ideological conflict and how important it is to our organizations. And I think how important it is to us as human beings, right? To be able to express, to talk about the things that we think are important. Right? So great teams do that really, really well. But in order to do it, you got to get rid of some of that bias around the idea that says conflict is bad. Because you got to create the right environment for that healthy ideological conflict to happen, don't you?
Mhm.
What are some of the things that we could do that creates a positive environment for healthy ideological conflict? Do or not do?
Eliminate blame.
Eliminate blame. Good, right? What happens when we start blaming somebody? What do?
Shut down.
Get
Shut
the
down.
content.
Right?
Yeah.
What else?
I think setting,
Attack the issue and not the person.
There you go. Okay, when we can get really good at attacking the issue and not attacking the person who brought the idea forward, right?
I think setting expectations in advance for that to be part of the culture so that people understand what what's expected of them and what's not, so there's a standard.
There you go, right? Setting expectations are even ground rules for how we're going to engage in this. How many of you are going to be comfortable in a business environment where we get into that furball of going around and all this, and the temperature starts to rise and the volume starts to rise?
Yeah.
How many of you are going to want to tend to back away from that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? However, some of you may have come from places where it's just like, wait a minute, come on, that's what life is, right? If you got part of your team that's on that spectrum that says if it's not getting elevated, then it's not important, and the other side of the team that's thinking if it's getting elevated, it's scary,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right? You got to figure out how to create an environment with your team that allows those people to live in harmony together.
Yeah.
Otherwise, what happens? The ones that love the loud are going to dominate and everybody else is going to back away. Ever been there?
Yep.
Right? This requires deliberate work. So ground rules, okay? Not placing blame, okay? Not attacking people, but attacking ideas. And let's flip that one around, right? As us as individuals, right? If we're going to engage in this, when we hear somebody attack our idea, what do we need to do?
Listen to that.
Defensive.
Listen to them. In what way, Ariel? In what way?
Active listening.
Okay.
What's the word? I mean,
Objectively.
just not taking offense to, just you know, the impartial, like not take offense, just listen to the idea and digest it and either accept it or kindly disagree.
There you go. Because how many of us have the propensity from time to time when somebody attacks our idea, even though they're not necessarily intending to be attacking us, we feel attacked.
Mhm.
I know I struggle with that. Okay. I am a people pleaser. Okay. This is a hard challenge for me.
Mhm.
Okay. And listening to that and being able to take it in, we have to engage in it in that way. So great teams work at creating the right environment, of stimulating it. How about the idea of actually mining for conflict? What does that term mean?
Like that you're looking for conflict?
Yeah, right. If you're working together with a team and you're not having any conflict, you're probably on target lock on. You're probably in that groupthink thing,
Yeah.
right? So what do
Is
you
that
do?
the same as an instigator?
There you go. As an instigator, right? Be the contrarian, right? The popular term is the devil's advocate, right?
Yep.
Throw that out there. Stick in an idea, because if it stimulates that dialogue and it gets you thinking about alternative ideas, that's going to lead to more creativity in what you're doing. How about the people that are sitting there and being really, really quiet during the course of the dialogue? What do you need to do with them?
Engage them.
Engaging.
Engage them. Okay. Don't be afraid to ask. Okay. Hey, you got to be thinking something here. Give us something here to go on, right? Because the worst possible thing is they're sitting there, they're not contributing anything, and they've got all this negative thought about where we're going with this. They don't express it. Now we make a decision, we leave the meeting, and they are completely not bought in.
Mhm.
Little place I call Box 13. That's a conversation for another day. John and I have talked about that a good bit. All right. So the idea here is being part of a team. How many of you have been part of a team that does this really, really well?
Conflict or
This whole idea of engaging
Oh.
in healthy ideological conflict.
Yeah.
Okay, good. What was that experience like, Dave?
Yeah, it was a super, just fruitful and healthy, and and it just brought a lot of different perspectives to it, and it just there's obviously has to be a lot of humility on all sides of it to sort of be open to listening. So yeah.
Good. And then how many of us have been part of teams where there's an elephant in the room and nobody will talk about it?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, the idea here is building the right environment, being willing to engage in it. And that requires us as leaders to be willing to step in, to be vulnerable, to take the risk, to engage in dialogue that way. If we don't lead into that environment, the people around us are going to take their cues, right? We've got to be willing to step into that, which includes, again, being willing to take critical feedback against the thoughts and ideas that we're throwing out.
Hey, Mike.
Yes.
Question: how would you engage with someone who's your senior, and you kind of report to him, but does not take criticism well at all, and deflects and kind of gets super defensive, and it's awkward, so you just never bring it up, and he makes a lot of mistakes, and he's technically my boss, so I just shut up and swallow whatever he did wrong, and he preaches at me, and I just don't say anything because it's hard. Because it's not, well, it's just not worth it, because it's always the same response, and it's just deflect, and blame game, someone else's fault.
Yep.
And getting to my breaking point, actually.
Great point. Okay, let's talk in that framework. I think it's a wonderful question. Okay, my working definition of leadership is leadership appears to be the art of getting other people to want to do what we believe needs to be done. Leadership appears to be the art of getting other people to want to do what we believe needs to be done. Now, with that definition of leadership, Connor, do you need to lead your boss?
Yeah, he's not a leader.
Whether he's a leader or not. Okay, here's the thought, guys. We are all in a place where we have bosses to lead. Okay. I have a challenge leading my wife. Okay? We've all been in positions where we've got that relationship. Leadership is not just about leading people that are designated to be our followers. You're leading in every relationship that you're part of, because we all want to have more influence to get the people around us to behave in the ways that are consistent with the way we want our world to be ordered. We're all exerting influence on people all around us all the time. And so I believe that leadership, okay, is a life skill. It's not a big L leader, CEO kind of skill. It's a life skill. Okay, every relationship in your life important relationship in your life will get better as you improve the quality of your leadership skills. So back to that point, Connor, you've got a role in trying to lead your boss, right? Okay, now we get to the place, and so I'm going to take this to a little bit of an extreme for you, not because I'm accusing you of something, but just to make a point. Okay, when we're trying to lead, okay, our bias as leaders say, I'm not getting the result that I'm expecting to get out of my follower. Our bias as leaders say, what about my leadership skill is not getting me the result that I'm expecting to get? The bias of somebody who doesn't want to lead is, poor me, I'm a victim of the fact that this person is not responding to my leadership. Well, here's the deal. You cannot be a leader and be a victim at the same time. They're mutually exclusive. You can't sit in that place. Right? So as leaders, we get to a place where we work at it, and eventually we do get to the place where we say, wait a minute, it's not my leadership skills, it's my knucklehead follower. Right? We've all been there. Okay? Because at some point in time, you got to get to that place, because there are knucklehead followers out there. Okay? When we get to the place where we say, it's not my leadership, it's my knucklehead follower, we fundamentally only have a couple of choices. We can't keep doing what we're currently doing, right? And expecting a different result, because that's the definition of insanity. Okay? So we've got two choices. We either figure out how to get content, right, with the fact that our follower is not responding to us and figure out how to work around that, or we have to fire our follower. When the follower is the problem and the follower happens to be the boss, what does firing the follower mean? Quitting. We got to walk with our feet. We got to vote with our feet. Okay? It's a challenge. Okay? Now, so Connor, all I can do is encourage you, okay, what about your leadership skill is not getting the proper response out of your boss? What else can you do to, now, I don't know enough about it and I can't turn this into a coaching session on that one, but fundamentally, right, that's the objective. You got to go figure that out before you get to the point to say, okay, I'm ready to fire my follower. Make sense? Okay. Now, practicing it, one of the things that we want to talk about today is the idea of how well we practice doing this makes a huge difference. We can get our bosses to observe what we do and get them to behave in ways that are consistent with the way that we're behaving. How many of you have had a follower that you have learned a very, very important lesson from the follower, right? Because of the way that they were behaving. I know I have. I'll tell you what, I've learned a lot more over time, right? Through the people that have given me good, credible feedback and helped me do that well, right?
Yeah, so Mike, would you say that I mean, sort of, I guess in that same vein, like, you know, you sort of say, okay, I start with sort of systematically saying, okay, is there any, you know, doing sort of a heart check. Okay, what's going on in my heart towards this person? What do I need to change? Then making an adjustment in the approach, giving that another attempt, right?
Yep.
And then once you hit that place where you say, okay, made the adjustment, checked my heart, made that, and they're still getting the same response, then basically, thirdly, you're saying, I just have the wrong jury. I can't, there's nothing I'm going to do to sway.
That's quite possible, exactly. And
Right.
so, but we may try multiple ways of going
Yeah.
about getting there, right?
Got it.
And sometimes, right, it may involve somebody else being engaged in the conversation as well. And I'll
Yeah.
talk about that here in a minute. And we'll get
Okay.
specifically to that idea of starting with the heart as well.
It's
It's
good.
so vitally important in what we do.
It's good.
So let's talk about the alternative, okay? We know this healthy ideological conflict that we need to engage in. And then there's this other stuff that we have to engage in, but wish that we didn't, right? What we'll call the unhealthy conflicts, right? The not so healthy stuff. And that looks like personal attacks. How many of us have been victims of that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. How many of us have probably levied a personal attack at some point in time? Okay. All right. How about this one? Talking behind others' backs,
Yeah.
right? We're talking about a person to a third party. That third party can do absolutely nothing about the fact that the original person is behaving that way, right? How about we get into these conflicts and all of a sudden we start to create relational barriers between us and the people that we're in conflict with?
Mhm.
We start building the wall, say, okay, well, I don't want to deal with it, so I'll just distance myself. Done that?
Yep.
Right? How about passing judgment?
Every day.
Guilty? Okay.
Yeah.
we start inferring judgments on other people based on the fact that they have the set of values and beliefs that may be different than ours.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of trying to understand what those are and figure out where we can find ways of engaging. Right? So an unhealthy conflict that you've been associated with sometime in the last week. Who's got an example?
I have one.
Go ahead, Ariel.
I have a coworker. She and I have been working together for about 7 years. And I am now her boss. And we were in a meeting recently where I was pretty much steamrolled and kind of diminished in my role, which ate away at me for about a week because I was very shocked at the conversation. And that conflict has actually gone on for the 7 years I've known her, and I just never said anything. Every time I should not have been shocked, but every time I was shocked that it was actually happening.
Okay.
And just recently, in the last week, after chewing on the most recent situation, I actually called Dave right before I had to call her because I was so amiss, but ended up having to bring up that conversation and not trying to blame her or call her out on what I think is a very prickly personality of saying the way that those words came out of your mouth were terrible and truly unkind, and it made the office look like there is a power struggle, and where is that coming from?
Mm-hmm. Well, congratulations for having the conversation.
I was sweating bullets.
I bet you were. And so that's what I want to talk about. That's a perfect scenario. Okay. So let's look at this from the construct of the fact that fundamentally that unhealthy conflict comes about when somebody does something, and by virtue of what they've done or said, we feel hurt. Okay.
Yeah.
We feel hurt. Okay. When we look at that, okay, there's fundamentally four reactions, four things that we do when we're in a circumstance where we felt hurt by another person. Okay? The first one is denial. Okay? We basically take and we say we deny the fact that the offense happened at all. How many of us do that from time to time? Right? You say, no, it didn't really bother me. Okay? Second response, we overlook it. Okay, in other words, we accept the fact that it happened, but we choose to overlook it. Right? When I was probably 13 or 14, I saw this little cross-stitch sampler on the wall that said, be to her virtues a little kind, be to her faults a little blind. Right? And I've used that. I mean, that's been a wonderful, wonderful little mantra for me, because let's face it, those of us that have been in a marital relationship, how many of us would have survived that relationship without overlooking some of the problems?
Yep.
Right? It's just, we got to be able to do it. Okay? So we've got denial, we've got overlook. The next one we have is confront. Okay, in other words, we choose to say, I'm not going to overlook this. I'm going to have a healthy dialogue with this person to try to figure out what went wrong. Okay, is that healthy? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Now let's go to the fourth one. The fourth one's what I call murder. Right? We respond to hurt by inflicting hurt. Right? And as the saying goes, hurt people hurt people.
Yeah.
Okay, it's just one of those things. Okay, so we have these responses from denial to murder. Now we know that at the end of the day, denial is not a healthy response. Okay, because what happens if our general mode is to deny that it happened? What eventually happens to us?
I explode.
You explode. So you go straight from denial to murder, right? We bypass, right?
Yeah.
So we know that denial and murder are not healthy responses.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got overlooking and confronting that are healthy responses when we've been hurt. We've got to make a choice. Now, many of us have the bias that we lean to the deny, overlook side. How many of us tend to lean to that side? That's me, okay? Because of that conflict aversion. There are other people that lean to the other side. They're more likely to go to the confront or the murder side. Okay? We have our bias for where we sit in that. We can all get better, regardless of which side of it we sit on. We can all get better at finding a way to sit in that healthy wedge, right? Either overlooking it appropriately or confronting it appropriately. But the problem is confrontation is just a skill that we fundamentally don't have as a society. Very, very few people do this well. Okay? It's just not an easy thing to do. So confronting is what we call a crucial conversation. And by the way, there's a book out there with that title, Crucial Conversations. This is absolutely the best resource I've ever found. I use this content as a coaching tool all the time. Okay, it's solid stuff. And it's
do you know who the author is?
Yes, Joseph Grenny, Grenny. I think there's actually 4 or 5 authors, but I think he's the lead author on the book.
Okay.
And it's a wonderful book. It's well worth the read, and it's very, very practical. It's not a heady thing. It's a step through it. So I'm going to give you some.
What's the name of the book? One more time, Mike.
Crucial
I
Conversations.
just put it in the chat as well, Ryan.
Okay.
Okay, so a crucial conversation is when there's likely to be high emotion, significant differences of opinion, and or high stakes. Okay? In other words, there's likely that we're going to definitely experience some of these negative feelings around conflict. So the key, right, as we're entering into this, when we see this, the key is, and David alluded to this earlier, starting with the heart. Okay? First question, what do you really want? So many times we enter into this confrontation without a clear idea of what it is that we really want to get out of the dialogue. What is it that we really want to happen? As the saying goes, if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there, right? And you will wander aimlessly in the process of trying to arrive. Figure out what it is that you really want and be willing to be specific about it. I even recommend write it down. Okay, there is something powerful about writing out, this is what I want to have happen in this conversation. Secondly, this is the challenge, but for you guys, for where you are and what you're collaborating to do, hopefully this is a question that will come naturally to you. What do you really want for the other person? For the other person, not from the other person.
That's good.
Right? When we consider what it is we really want for them, because we want restoration in the relationship, don't we? Do we just want that for ourselves, or do we actually legitimately care enough about the other person that we want them for that for them as well? It's vitally important that we get ourselves to a place that says we want it for them also. You can't engage in a good, healthy conflict if you don't have your heart in that place. Right? How many of us have walked in, right? We've been angry. All we want is what we want. We don't care what the other person wants. And boy, we completely tear the thing up in the process. Who's been there? I know I have.
Yep.
Okay. It's just not good. So then the next thing that we've got to do is to try to understand our path. Understand your path. So let me explain what that means. When we feel hurt by somebody, this is the path that actually happened. There's a stimulus. Okay? Somebody said or did something. In other words, it's the fact. These are the words that came out of their mouth, or this is the action that they engaged in. Next, our minds take those facts, the stimulus, and our minds tell us a story based on those facts. We decide what those facts mean based on the story that's being told in our mind. He said this about me. My story is he doesn't like me. Come on, we've all watched enough courtroom dramas. We've all heard this expression. Drawing conclusions based on facts, not in evidence. Right? We do it all the time. So it's really important that we understand that we have the stimulus, we tell ourselves a story. What does the story produce in us? Emotion. The story produces an emotion. And then once that emotion comes out, what do we tend to do with that emotion?
React.
We react in some way, shape, or form. So back to this, you made me so angry. No, you didn't make me angry. You did something. I told myself a story. I had an emotional response to that, and I reacted in anger. This is back to that idea of how often we get in this victim mentality place that says somebody did this. A lot of times they didn't really do it. They did something that fundamentally was innocuous, but our story turned it into something that wasn't. So we need to be willing to sit down and actually think through, okay, what's the path? Right? And that story is what I like to call stinking thinking. Right? It's the attitudes that are in the back of our mind that cause us to see things and respond in certain ways. We think, we see this, and therefore we conclude this. We draw so many conclusions incorrectly. Right? And so we have to be willing to look at that, to understand what that path is. And this is not easy work. Right? Because what does it require you to do?
Maybe look at something you did as well, or yourself in the situation.
Yeah. Takes two to tango, doesn't it?
Right.
Okay. And it requires us to set down our emotions. We don't want to do that, do we? Come on, how many of us have been in that place? I'm angry and I do not want to not be angry. I want the right to stay in my anger.
Yep.
And, oh, by the way, I am justified in doing so.
Yeah.
Right? We got to be willing to set that stuff down in order to objectively look at our path, because is it possible in looking at our path and we start to realize, wait a minute, why did I tell myself that story? And all of a sudden we start to realize that the reason I told myself that story was because of something that somebody did to me 10 years ago that had nothing to do with what this person did to me. It's baggage that I'm carrying around, and I'm drawing this conclusion because that person did that to me. Therefore, that's what this person was intending. Okay, we've got to be willing to look hard at that, and it requires us to set it down and sort of take the step back and actually say, what is the path? It's very introspective, and it's not easy. Right? You got to get yourself to an emotional space. Sometimes it requires you physically separate yourself, right? We all have our different techniques for how we can do that introspective kind of work, but we've got to do it. Okay? So step one, analyze your path, right? Start with the heart, analyze your path. What's the path that got me to where I am? Next, own your part. Okay, that's back to the idea that says we all had something to contribute. We all had something to contribute. Understand you need to own what's yours and be willing to do that. Okay, next, go humbly. Go humbly. If you're well armed with understanding what you want out of the conversation and you're in a right space about what you want for the other person in the conversation, you've thought through the path and you understand what may have gotten you to where you were, and now you're willing to own up to your part of the conflict, to take responsibility for your part of it, and you're willing to humbly go talk about that, you have just done most of the difficult work in getting to the closure. Because my experience says, okay, if I'm in conflict and I go to the place of doing that humbly and I own my part of the dialogue of the conflict, it's amazing to me how many times now it's a race to the bottom, right? Of who has the most responsibility. The other person says, oh, Mike, I appreciate you saying that, but really, I know it was me. Boom, 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 right? What happens to the conflict when we start getting in that mode? It just dissipates. It absolutely dissipates. Now, that does not happen all the time. Let's face it, right? I mean, Connor, you're alluding to it, okay? You know, you got a boss that deflects and doesn't listen, whatever, right? It doesn't always happen that we do our part and the response is positive, okay? But at that point in time, the next step is we got to listen, right? As the saying goes, there's a reason God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth, okay? We need to listen and try to encourage the other person to state their path. What got them to where they are in the conflict? Right? What did I do that caused them, right? What story might they have told themselves? What conclusions did they draw by virtue of that? At least in the process of stating their path, you can decide whether or not you actually both saw the same stimulus. How many times do you find out that you're in conflict and what you saw and what they saw are 2 completely different things? Well, at least now, maybe we can at least agree on the facts, right? By having them out on the table. What really happened? We may not agree that either person's story was a legitimate story, but at least we can agree on the facts. And now, go ahead.
So I was just going to say, this is really, really good. We've got about 2 minutes.
Yep.
I'm almost tempted to have you come on a second time because this is so good.
Okay, and I'm going to land the plane right now with the last point then, okay? Search for the common ground. Find the ground on which you can build the relationship.
Okay.
Okay? And then I'm going to leave this with one last little expression that I think is important for you to take away. Do not fall for the fool's choice. The fool's choice says I can either have harmony in the relationship or I can speak truth. No, we can have both. But many of us are conditioned to fall for that fool's choice. Be willing to engage in it, and you can make a difference in the relationship.
Mike, I'd just like to say one quick thing before I jump off. First, thank you very much for sharing all that. I apologize, I was a little late, but you know, as I hear you talking about listening intently, going into it with the right heart condition, you know, seeking common ground. I mean, all this, to me, I keep hearing pride jump out, right?
Okay.
If you can sort of kick your pride out of the way for a minute and go into this more level-headed, you know, put the other person ahead of yourself, you know, that's where so much of this conflict doesn't get resolved. And I think if you can change that paradigm, you get a better result.
That's good.
Got it.
Mike,
Thanks, Ryan.
this has been fantastic. I know it's been extremely fruitful for everybody on here. And so thank you for giving us your time. And could we have you on again?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. So thank you again. It was amazing. And I know I'm actually recorded this, guys, and I'm going to create a YouTube channel and I'll put this up there and let everybody know so you can go back and review it as well. So thanks, LVH3, for coming, and have a fantastic day. We'll see you next
as well.
week.
Thanks for the
Mike.
invitation. Y'all
Yes.
take care.
Bye.
Thanks,